Rep the South Side whenever you pay with your White Sox debit card from Wintrust Community Banks and score perks like free ATMs, no monthly fees, and a $300 opening bonus. Pay with pride every time with Wintrust, Chicago's bank.
Hey everybody, it's Chuck Garfien. Welcome to the White Sox Podcast, brought to you as always by Wintrust, Chicago's bank. Show your team pride with the White Sox debit card. Get yours at wintrust.com/Sox. Member FDIC, EHL lender. All right, 2 months ago, this is a podcast nobody saw coming. Miguel Vargas was the centerpiece of the 8-player blockbuster trade last summer between the White Sox, the Cardinals, and the Dodgers. The White Sox were immediately and nationally criticized for the deal, saying they didn't get enough back in return. And then Vargas joined the White Sox, and yeah, it was ugly. He batted .104 for the White Sox in 42 games. He slugged .170, and those voices and criticisms were louder and louder against the White Sox and this trade. But here we are, almost a year later, and the trade is starting to look a whole lot different for the White Sox. Vargas is arguably the White Sox best player. He leads the team in runs, hits, doubles, homers, RBIs, and walks. He might make the All-Star team. No one else in this trade is even close to making the All-Star team. So it begs the question, will the White Sox end up winning the Miguel Vargas trade? It is worth a discussion. And I'm talking about it with one of the best baseball writers in the country, Derrick Goold of the St. Louis Post-Dispatch. The Cardinals are in town this week. I'll get his thoughts on the trade almost a year later. Plus, I don't know, could the Cardinals be a trade partner for 𝗻𝗺cy Robert Jr.? That and more on the way. Let's do it. All right, join us on the podcast from the St. Louis Post-Dispatch, one of the top writers in baseball. It is Derrick Goold. Derrick, thanks for joining me. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for those kind words, Chuck. It's good to see you.
Yeah, I can't believe we're doing this podcast, but here we are. We're doing this podcast about the Miguel Vargas trade, how it has changed, certainly in my view, in the last month or so. What did you think about the trade after it happened? You obviously covered the Cardinals, covered the Cardinals, and you were covering this story. What did you think when it happened?
Well, it was sort of fait accompli that they were going to try to trade for Erick Fedde. I mean, I'm not sure there was a bigger match even going back to spring training. We were like, well, that's the guy who they're going to try to get. I mean, he had all the traits, all the profile of what the Cardinals were likely going to be in a position to want to do at the trade deadline. And, you know, the bang for the buck was there to answer a question for the next year too. So there's just, I mean, look, we were like expecting something to happen for them to acquire Fedde. It just made so much sense for it not to. I think the lightning bolt was that 𝗵𝗏 Edman was involved. A very good player for the Cardinals who had spent the entire year on the injured list, and just we hadn't seen him at all. And it wasn't clear whether or not, when he was going to come back. A lot of questions about why it had been delayed for so long, and some questions about what his role would be when he did return. There's likely going to be a place for him maybe in center field or somewhere, but how he fit into it. And then, of course, he was gone, and not just gone, but traded to the Dodgers, which really was something that the Cardinals were like, that's not they would have preferred not to do that. They obviously didn't want to do a 1-for-1 with the Dodgers or even get engaged in conversation with the Dodgers. So they needed the White Sox as the go-between, and then it was back to Fedde. So I think that's what it was. It was a trade that you expected to happen for months going into it, but it was the player that they sent out to make it work that was a surprise.
You go around social media at that time. You go around national media at the time, and the White Sox just got roundly criticized for it. I'm just looking at what ESPN graded the trade, with each team. The Cardinals got an A, Dodgers a B+, the White Sox a D. The Cardinals gave up 𝗵𝗏 Edman and a 17-year-old pitcher and they got Erick Fedde and Tommy Pham. That's a pretty good return for the Cardinals. Wouldn't you agree?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Tommy, you can kind of see the faint outline of wins above replacement in that trade, right? Like Tommy Edman, when playing, is a strong defensive WAR player. And so you could see how if you were just to look at it through that filter, that the Cardinals not only did well, but why it balanced a little bit with what Fedde was going to bring. I think they asked about adding Tommy Pham and said, oh, well, could we add Tommy Pham to that for a right-handed bat for the outfield, something that the Cardinals really kind of still need, to be honest. And there was an agreement to just add Tommy Pham to it. So, yeah, I mean, I think that, I don't think that pushed the trade over the top for the Cardinals. They probably would have done it without Tommy Pham. It just kind of added to the bonus. Now, Tommy Pham was there for a grand slam and then gone to the Royals. So, I'm not sure how, that was the grade probably coming out of the trade deadline. 2 weeks later, I'm not quite sure that they would have gotten the same grade. A month later, I'm not sure they would have gotten the same grade. And it'd be interesting now, of course. Like, I'm not sure any of the teams would get the same grade. I guess the Dodgers would get an A because they got a World Series and an NLCS MVP out of that deal.
So I asked a scout after the trade what he thought of the deal, and he said St. Louis seems to have come out smelling like a rose. Mm-hmm. I thought Fedde and Kopech on their own would bring back some bigger name pieces for the White Sox. And a lot of people thought that. Here was Miguel Vargas, who in 2023 was a consensus top 40 prospect in all of baseball. Keith Law had him ranked 23rd in all of baseball. And then the White Sox got two young guys, two 19-year-old prospects who have upside. But at the time, it did not look like a good trade at all. But here now is Miguel Vargas, who might end up making the All-Star team for the White Sox. He's under team control until 2030. After this season, all the other players involved in this trade for the Cardinals and for the Dodgers will be free agents.
Well, Tommy signed that big deal. So he's got that extension. But they would have been. Yeah, you're right. They would have been. Yeah. I mean, if the Dodgers hadn't locked him in with, like in their afterglow of a championship. But you're exactly right. Like the balance of the control years was so much weighted towards the White Sox. From the Cardinals' perspective, they were looking to make a deal. One thing that really made that palatable for them, while it was they didn't want to deal Tommy Edman directly to the Dodgers, but one of the things that made that deal palatable for them is they didn't have to give up any of their top prospects. They were still, they've gone more to this route this year where they just really want to hold on to them. But they were really reluctant last year to deal some of their prospects. And I'm not sure that they really got a whole lot of interest in the prospects in general for what they thought that they were worth. And so that was the part for the Cardinals, was they could deal from their major league injured list. And then, of course, a young player who they had previously got from, the pitcher that they got in that deal, real quick, I don't know if it'll play out or not, but is one of these players who they signed on the international amateur route after a deal fell through with another team because that other team went over their bonus purse. So the Cardinals jumped in to sign the young pitcher that was part of this trade, who had been, I believe, a San Diego Padre commitment. And then the Padres had to shuffle their money, didn't have enough, had to, withdraw from an agreement with the pitcher, and the Cardinals jumped on the chance to get him.
Got it. I'm looking at Tommy Pham. So he played 23 games for the Cardinals.
Yeah, 23 amazing games.
Yeah. Put on waivers August 31st, picked up by the Royals. He's now with the Pirates. Since 2022, Tommy Pham has played for 8 different teams.
That's crazy.
Red Sox, Mets, Diamondbacks, White Sox, Cardinals, Royals, Pirates. He might get traded again at the deadline here. And then Fedde, with the Cardinals, you just look at his numbers, and you're watching every single game, and I'm not. But he's 5-11 with a 3.68 ERA, making $7.5 million this year. He'll be a free agent at the end of the season, and he actually starts against against the White Sox this week. How has Fedde been, and how do the Cardinals feel about what they've been getting from him? Well, they didn't really give up much, but what do they think about how he's been pitching for them?
Yeah, he's not been, they felt he was really fatigued and exhausted last season. He told them as much when he got there, and a few weeks into when he was after the trade, he kind of said, look, this is more innings. This is more of a grind than I've had. I'm pretty gassed. And they made some choices about how to use him. They understood that that's not exactly ideal when the pitcher that you are counting on to kind of give you a boost to keep you in contention for a playoff berth is not the guy down the stretch that feels, strong and ready to go. So they went into this year with a bit more knowledge then about like, okay, what to expect from him, and adjusted accordingly. And he's pitched fine. He's had tremendous games. He had, the first complete game there for him of his career. Of course, it came against the Washington Nationals, his first team. So look for that against the White Sox, I guess. that's what he does. But he's also talked about how, he's had to work on some pitches. He felt like his sweeper wasn't really there for him for a while. We just talked to him the other day, and he was describing how he kind of had the feeling back to it. He spent some time talking with Sonny Gray about thumb placement on the pitch and adjusted it a little bit, and he was getting better results. So I think, for the Cardinals, he's kind of been as advertised, and they just see it, what he brings to a rotation and his, potential, and, they see his given, and then they see his potential, and then they see his salary, and it's still a lot of bang for the buck when you think about like just what the given is. And then above it, you mentioned that the ERA is above average. The innings are just about average. The strikeout rate is not the modern game. He pitches to contact. He hasn't gotten that much swing and miss. But for the salary that he has, he's a big help for this team. And we'll see what direction they go. But Steven Matz, Ryan Helsley, these are some real chips to play on the trade at the trade deadline, and it'll be really instructive for us to look at if the Cardinals do trade Erick Fedde, what do they get in return, and how does that compare to last year's deal?
So you think they might trade him at the deadline, or if they don't, do you see them trying to sign him next year?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think if this season spirals for them and they're a distance away from the Cubs, and what that distance is, they haven't really defined. They're still trying to figure that out. They have a lot of games left after the deadline where they could at least control some of their destiny. But this year was not about that. They've made it very clear that this year is about youth and about retaining youth and about getting playing time for young players and about leaving this year knowing what direction they're headed with their in-house players so that when 𝗦𝗏 takes over, he has a head start on that. With all of that being said, and the description being there's so much future focused around here, the recent success has started to change some of that. Their winning record has started to change some of that. They get into the grind of late June, July, they slink back, then they will entertain trades for Erick Fedde. They will entertain trade talks for Ryan Helsley. They definitely will receive trade interest for Steven Matz, and he might be one that they are able to get the most for, to be honest. All these guys are free agents at the end of the year. Miles Mikolas too. And the Cardinals see this as a chance to really give 𝗦𝗏, I've heard it described as a clean slate from which to build the next Cardinals era. And so that with that being the tone, Chuck, there's really not this sense that they're going to go resign Erick Fedde, that they're going to go bring him back. The questions become, what do they do with the qualifying offer? How do they try to get that draft pick back? It seems most likely that they do that with Ryan Helsley and see what happens if they do keep him. But their preference, if they decide that the future is a focus at the trade deadline, is to use these pieces, flip them, and get players who will contribute in the future.
All right, so with what you're saying and what you have said on this podcast, this is very interesting now looking at the lens of this trade, this Vargas trade, because it was a slam dunk, amazing return for the Cardinals, considering what you gave up, which was essentially, I don't want to say nothing because Edman became something big time for the Dodgers. But now, like, Pham's gone. Fedde might get traded at the deadline.
Mm-hmm.
And the Dodgers won a World Series. 𝗏𝗏 was great for them.
He's great, yeah.
Okay, so that both those guys helped them win a World Series, and that's what this is all about. So the Dodgers slam dunk for them,
mm-hmm.
and then he signed Edman to a long-term deal. 𝗏𝗏 hasn't. He just came back. He had a shoulder injury. He's pitched a couple of innings right now. They are, I would say, winning this trade still. But then you look at, 𝗏𝗏's going to be a free agent after this season.
Yeah,
and Vargas he might be an all-star for the White Sox. And then the other two guys in the deal, 𝗵𝗂 he's 20 years old. He's in high A. We don't know what he's going to turn into, but 61 games, 14 doubles, 12 homers, 40 RBIs.
That's good.
793 OPS. He's the White Sox 18th ranked prospect. And then the other guy they got in the deal from the Dodgers is Alexander Albertuz. It's always good when you make a trade and they say, oh, by the way, he's got a broken leg.
Oh, yeah.
But he just started playing games in the Arizona Complex League. He's the White Sox 14th ranked prospect. They're higher, I think. I shouldn't say they're higher, but there's maybe more upside for him even than Perez. And on top of it, you have Vargas. So here's what I'm going to ask you. How would you grade the trade for all three teams today?
It's a great question. You mean like on an ABC scale? I mean, look, The Dodgers win. They got their NLCS MVP out of this deal. They got their World Series. I'm kind of a bottom line guy with that. They got contributors to a championship team. The White Sox got what they needed at the time, which was people who will help in the future. That's just, there's no other way. They weren't going anywhere but trying to avoid history, I guess, last year. And their entire focus had to be on creating and gathering depth and possible contributors for the future. The Cardinals, it didn't go the way they wanted. They didn't get to the playoffs. I mean, look, they wanted Fedde to help in the present in the last year to help them pilot through and get into the playoffs. It didn't happen for them. They fell shy. How valuable is a winning record? I think, that is actually something that we debated a bit around St. Louis. Like, is there really that big of a difference between 79 wins and 83 wins? For the Cardinals, I would suggest last year had a little bit more on finishing with a winning record just because they had never had back-to-back losing records since like the time of Stan Musial, and very rarely in their history. So is that a cosmetic thing as opposed to a substantive thing? Absolutely. But that still is something that they would have to wear as a team, that they were the first back-to-back losing things. That said, Fedde helped them get to a winning record, but not to the postseason. Postseason was the goal. So the trade falls shy, and it goes into the heap of other Cardinals deals where they watch a player involved go off and win an LCS MVP. Randy Arozarena did it. Adolis Garcia did it. Both of them were ALCS MVPs for their teams on the way to the pennant. And now Tommy Edman did it for the NLCS. So that's where this ranks for Cardinal fans. They got so far the least out of it. But for them, it's still unfinished, because they might be in a spot like the White Sox were, where they get something that helps them in the future at this trade deadline. And so there could be a downstream result of this trade yet to happen.
All right, this portion of the podcast is brought to you by Toyota. Let's go places. All right, I need letters. I need you to grade.
Oh, you need grades?
I need grades. Because, this is what people want to see. Is it an A, B, C, D?
Is it? All right. So, the Dodgers get an A because, look, they won the series. The Cardinals get, C- because they fell shy. But they have some work that they didn't turn in at the deadline. And we can see if they, make up some of that grade with a trade. I think what the White Sox are on the other side of that, probably, like a C+. Fedde was a strong chip to play, and there was interest in him. Could they have struck for a better deal elsewhere? that part is, I think, really interesting, because I think it would have been a more high risk, possibly higher ceiling, but higher risk prospect. And so by doing the deal that they did, they tried to blend that a little bit, get a guy who they knew would at least make it, and then maybe get some folks who could be lightning for prospects. And so I like that part of it. And I think that nudges it up. If you want to give that a C+ or a B-, that's fine, where C is average. I think the Cardinals came in slightly below average because they didn't get what they wanted, which was an immediate result in that playoff berth. And the White Sox got a little bit of what they needed, which was focus towards the future and a contributor who is already there for them.
Yeah, I look at it as this. The Dodgers got the instant bang for their buck.
Mm-hmm.
So you win a World Series, and we'll see what 𝗁𝗏 becomes. I mean, he might sign with another team. So after this season, so then he's not there. And then you've got the White Sox, who have Vargas for 4 more years, and these other two guys. If Vargas becomes a guy for your team and has a WAR,
then it's strong. Yeah,
and
then they win.
Then they win. I mean,
they win the trade. Yeah.
So that's
I'm kind of bottom line on it, Chuck, where I look at free agents come and free agents go and flags fly forever. So I mean, it's a matter of, do the White Sox eventually get an A from that trade? Not so much do the White Sox overtake the Dodgers and win the trade. I think the Dodgers already won the trade. Now it's just a matter of like, what benefit do they get for, the White Sox may end up getting the most WAR from this trade, and that's a win. But that WAR isn't going to put a ring on their finger like Tommy Edman and 𝗁𝗏 did. I
agree with that one. It's just interesting that it did seem like the Cardinals got the most of the deal in the beginning. Like they were getting A's across the board, and now you have them at a C-.
No, it's a great point. It is really, and it speaks to like how trades work, right? Everything gains clarity in hindsight, right? I wonder what would make it an A for the Cardinals. Like if they had gotten to face the Dodgers in the NLCS, if they had made the playoffs and Fedde had been a part of that, I think that would have been a good return. And even then, we're grading trades on the performance post trade, which I always kind of think is interesting, because obviously teams don't have that information. We benefit from it. But I do think that like that's something that your question has got me thinking, like, what would be an A for the Cardinals? Probably a postseason, and pivot in a different direction than their reset this year. Like the ripple effects of that. Then if it emanated from that trade, if Tommy Pham contributed as a right-handed bat off the bench, if Fedde was their best player, their number 2 starter, let's say in the playoff series, then that would be hard to ignore as a really beneficial trade.
Or maybe if they end up trading Fedde and they get some jackpot prospect in return who becomes
there you
guy.
Go. Yeah. If they trade Fedde and they get the pitcher that they don't have in their system, or they get a bat that they don't have in their system, and they come out of this year with the 7th overall pick last year in 𝗵𝗻𝗃, the 5th overall pick this year, and whoever they get, but it should be somebody good, and then a prospect. If they rewrite their top 10 prospects with moves at the deadline and the 2 draft picks, then the Cardinals are in a spot that they want to be. And that trade is part of it. It's not the entirety, but that trade is part of it.
All right, a couple more things. All right, you guys are in town this week. Do you need a center fielder?
No, they do not.
Okay. Mm-hmm. 𝗻𝗏𝘃 Robert Jr. is available. Would there be any interest from the Cardinals on the 𝗻𝗏𝘃 Robert Jr. trade?
The one that got away, there definitely would be interest from fans who always point to him and to 𝗻𝗃 Jr. as 2 of the players that the Cardinals did not extend to sign. And certainly there was a lot of effort put into trying to bid on and recruit 𝗻𝗏𝘃 Robert Jr. So there's some lingering fondness there. Some of those executives and scouts who are involved in that are still around with the Cardinals. So but it would be so counter to what they've told us all along. thinking about their center field position now. It's Victor Scott. He's struggling. But they want that the word that they're throwing around is runway. They want to give these guys a lot of playing time to sort through things and see where it goes. And Victor Scott, they believe, is a part of their future. His speed, his defense, his offense as he adjusts and what he gets, what he's working on and developing at the major league level, they think will pay off in the long run. And they don't want to create roadblocks to that where it looks like they're focused on the now. And that's the biggest shift for the 2025 Cardinals is, for decades, they've been about the now and how do they compete now and how do they perform now and who do they get to be better now. And, this team is more about like, okay, what do we do now to be better in the future? And a move like that would be about the now. And they've said over and over again that they don't want to make that kind of move.
Okay. The Cardinals in town, they've lost 7 of 8, 4-10 in June. The White Sox 5-9 in June, but playing much better at home. What do you expect to see in this series?
I think the Cardinals need some traction. They lost 3 of 4 in Milwaukee. They really thought they had a chance to split that series after a raucous game Saturday, and then they just went quiet offensively. They got a real hard, long, and detailed look at how strong Milwaukee's pitching is, and just the stuff coming out of the pitching staff there, particularly the bullpen, was on full display. So I think they're kind of looking for some, it's kind of a safe harbor in the storm at the moment because they know June is so difficult as far as the schedule goes. The number of games in a row, they just had 13 in 13 days. They got another stretch where they only have this off day in the month. And so they've kind of clung to this day as a refresher. And then they re-enter the final push of the month against the White Sox, who they're looking like, okay, can we get some traction there? This is where the rotation is set up well. It should be rested. It should be good. They should have Lars Nootbaar back in the lineup and after a couple days off to find his swing and kind of reset mentally. So they want to be more of themselves in this White Sox series. They got Jordan Walker back from the injured list. They got Brendan Donovan back from a sore toe. And they believe they'll have Lars Nootbaar back in the lineup, maybe even back at leadoff after a couple days just to get a break because of the number of strikeouts and struggles he's had over the past few weeks. So they feel they arrive on the south side with a full complement of a team, the team that they want for the first time in several weeks, and that should give them a better start to this back half of the month. That's what they're looking for. That's what they're hoping for.
All right. Well, Derrick, I appreciate the time as always. We'll see what this trade looks like in a year, 5 years. And I like
6 weeks. We might know in 6 weeks what the Cardinals get for Fedde. Just line it up. See if they, do they get a young Tommy Edman in the deal and just, and time is a flat circle.
Yeah. Well, at the very least, I like that it's trending in the right direction for the White Sox, which
absolutely. Yeah.
A month ago, 2 months ago, I did not see this coming, and here we are. So
that's great. Yeah.
Derrick Goold of the St. Louis Post-Dispatch. Appreciate the time. 𝗭cie 𝗿𝗄𝗋, take it away.
All right, Chuck, this edition of the White Sox Podcast is over.